There we go. Okay, so today we're going to talk about non-resident licensing and contracting. That's something that we are very, very familiar with. Crone Associates, the way it works with Medicare is any state you're going to get licensed, any state you want to get paid in, even if it's just collecting overrides, you have to be licensed in that state. So we're licensed in a lot of them, and both for myself and for the agency. So something we're really familiar with. And we do get a lot of questions about getting a non-resident license. It's actually, even though you have state insurance departments involved, it's actually a lot simpler than you might think, but we'll go through that. So we'll talk about, should you get a non-resident license in the first place? So kind of throughout this presentation, I'll talk about the pros and cons of getting it. There are some negatives as well. It's easy to get one, but there are some things to consider. We'll talk about how to apply for one, what the requirements are, how contracting works after that, the fees, there are non-resident licensing fees, and then just kind of wrap it up talking about the overall. And then I will answer questions at the end, and hopefully I'll know the answer. If I don't know the answer, I will sound very convincing as though I do know the answer. Okay, so a non-resident license is needed for every state that you're going to write business in, other than obviously your resident state. You have to have a license in your resident state, but if you want to write in other states, you have to be licensed in that state so you can get appointed with the carrier and write the business. There's no situation where you can write in a state, a non-resident state, without a license, so you have to have it. This often comes into play for people with their neighboring states, states where there's retirees. I know, we get a lot of, I'm in Connecticut, we get a lot of people that retire in, it used to be all Florida, but now it's a lot of Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. And, as an agent, you want to be able to write those people. So you might want to get a license in those states. We have some people that are do a lot of telesales. They will tend to be licensed in a whole bunch of states, 20 plus. The other reason you'll see a lot of people get non-resident licenses is for sub-agents. If you're an agency, if you have a sub-agent who wants to write business in multiple states, in order for them to even be contracted in those states, if they're with you, you have to be licensed as the agency in those states. They can't. For example, if somebody has let's say an agency has a United Healthcare contract and there's sub-agents underneath them, and they want to appoint with United in Virginia. Well, that agency needs to be licensed in Virginia and appointed with United, for example, in Virginia, for that sub-agent to get appointed there. So oftentimes you'll see agencies, because of their sub-producers, they need to get licensed in a lot of states. And as I mentioned before, people in telesales often want to sell in a lot of states, and they'll get licensed in a number of them. So is it worth getting it to write one case? Well, it depends on the licensing fee in that state. It varies tremendously from state to state, the licensing fee. They range from $40 non-resident licensing fee to $250, depending on the state. Also, keep in mind when I'm talking about this, if you are an individual producer, you just need a license for yourself. However, if you have an LLC or an entity of some kind getting paid, or if you're an agency, that's two non-resident licenses because you need one for yourself and the entity. No entity with Medicare can be paid unless it's licensed and contracted with the carrier. So keep that in mind. If you have an entity that gets paid, meaning, in other words, an LLC, an agency, something, that can't get paid unless it's licensed in that state. So that would be two fees. Now, speak of the devil, lo and behold, I forgot the slide is on here. I gave some examples of non-resident licensing fees in given states. Connecticut's $140. Florida is $50 initial plus $5 per each line of authority, meaning life accident and health is a line of authority. P&C is a line of authority, so every line of authority is an extra $5. Kentucky's $50 plus they charge you $50 to process your application. California is $188. New York kind of does their own thing. They have what's called a regulatory fee, and it's different for every resident agent appointing. So if it's a set fee for somebody who's a resident of Virginia getting a non-resident in New York, it's a different fee for somebody who's a resident of Massachusetts getting a non-resident in New York. So that's all over the board. with New York. As I mentioned before, keep in mind if you have an agency that's getting paid, that agency to get paid needs to be licensed, and this would be ×2 on the fees. So you got to keep that in mind. So how would you get the non-resident license? Well, it's actually pretty easy. You go to NIPR.com. I have the website listed there for you. So the National Insurance Producers Registry is the hub for all state licensing. That's where you would go to get your non-resident license. So you'd simply go there. You'd click the licensing center, click apply for a license. They're going to give you the option then of going to the online application. They then will make you enter the information to identify your resident state. So you have to enter your information. It'll pull up your resident state. And if you're trying to add an individual non-resident license, you'd enter your personal info. If you're trying to do it for an agency, you'd enter your corp info. So you'll see as you get in there, it's really not that difficult. But again, when you're applying for a non-resident license, you're either doing it as an individual or you're doing it for an agency. And if you're an individual with an agency, you're doing it for both. So you choose the initial application type. They'll give you the option, are you doing a resident or non-resident state license? You do non-resident, and then you just pick the state you want, and you apply. It's pretty simple. I'll go back for a minute. It's NIPR.com. Pretty easy to do, pretty straightforward as well. So once you do that, at that point, really all they want is your money. So you'd go on there, choose the state you want, choose the line of authority or license you want. For example, life accident and health license, give them your money, and then the license will be available at some point to print. Depends on the state. I was going to put a time frame in there. I'm hesitant to do that, though, because some states are like immediate. Others, you got to wait. But at some point, it'll be available on NIPR so you can print it out. A couple common questions I get about this. People will say, well, Ed, what are the CE requirements for the non-resident states? There are none. The only CE requirement is for your resident state. So I'm a resident of Connecticut. I have to do my Connecticut insurance license CE. I'm appointed in 49 other states. I don't have to do CEs for those states. As long as I keep up my resident CE, my CE in my resident state, I'm all set. Also, with most companies, you don't need to do additional certifications. I'll give you an example, Aetna. I'm appointed with Aetna in Connecticut. I add all the other states. So I have the ability then to sell Aetna in the other states. It's one cert. I already did my Aetna certification, my annual certification, Medicare certification. Adding additional states does not require additional certifications. Now, there's some caveats and little things with that, like Aetna, for example. They strongly suggest that you do webinars for the additional states you're going to sell in. Some companies like United Healthcare, for example, that's it, just one cert and you're done. The anomalies here are if you're working with a company that has multiple companies offering Medicare plans. For example, if you do your Blue Cross Blue Shield, that is, if it's an Anthem company, one of the 19 Anthem states for Blue Cross Blue Shield, your certification is good for all 19 states. If you're going to say do a contract with Horizons in New Jersey, that's a completely different Blue Cross. They will have their own certification to do. For example, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, not an Anthem state. They're just their own Blue Cross. Got to do a separate certification because it's different plans, different company. So people tend to think I'm on a tangent here, but I do realize it at least. People tend to think Blue Cross is Blue Cross. It isn't. It's almost like a McDonald's franchise. They probably wouldn't like to hear me say that, but it's whoever bought the rights for Blue Cross in that given state. So Anthem has 19 states. All the other Blues are separately owned. Anyway, enough of my tangent. I gave some examples there of companies where it's one cert and you're all set with whatever state you're going to sell in. You just got to add the state. So basically, you determine you want to get a non-resident license. You go on an IPR, you apply, you get the license, and then you want to add a carrier. At that point, all you have to do is just send us the license for that state and let us know what carriers you want to add. That simple. So you just say, hey guys, I got my license in Virginia. I want to add these 3 companies. give us a copy of the license, and we will add the 3 companies. And I do see a couple questions popping up. I certainly will answer those at the end in just a few minutes here. This will, like I said, will be a pretty short webinar. I put warning in there. It's definitely something to pay attention to. Not only when you apply for a non-resident license do you pay the non-resident licensing fee, and also I should mention before I even get to the warning, you're going to pay your initial non-resident licensing fee, but keep in mind you'll have to pay renewal fees every year or every 2 years depending on the state as well. So that's an ongoing thing. In addition to that, what you need to be aware of is some companies will pass on the resident appointment fee to you. So for example, United Healthcare. Let's say you want to add United Healthcare in 20 states. Well, they don't charge an appointment fee in your resident state, but they certainly do. They'll pass the appointment fee on to you in those 19 non-resident states, and it can get expensive. So in addition to your license fees, you're going to have a carrier fee. Now, United charges non-resident licensing fees. They pass them on to you. They usually take them out of your commission. And like I said, it can get expensive. I've had a couple agents where they had 20-some states, and then they're paying a couple $1,000s a year for appointment fees for United non-resident. Some companies don't charge those. They pay them. They don't pass them on to you. Aetna is an example. You can get non-resident appointments with Aetna. They don't pass any fee on to you. They pay it. So I mentioned NIPR is easy, which it is. It's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. There are some tough states, however. California and Florida are the ones that immediately come to mind for me. They are tough because they require you to have fingerprints on file. And just because you did fingerprints in one state doesn't necessarily mean they'll accept them in a different state. So, for example, if you wanted to get a non-resident license in California, you go on NIPR, you apply for that non-resident license, they're going to say fingerprints are required. Now, NIPR will guide you through this whole thing, but it's going to say you got to get fingerprints done, so there'll be on there a link to where you can order a fingerprint kit. The kit is sent to you. You go to a center that they verify you can use. In the past, California was hard because they only had certain places where you could go. Some states like Florida will let you go to a local police barracks and get your fingerprints done, but it's going to slow the process up because you got to get the kit, get the fingerprinting done, send it in, and then they'll process that non-resident license. NIPR lists the requirements for any given state. So what's nice about it is when you go on there, and you'll see, if you haven't been on there, you should just go on and look. If you go on there, it'll walk you right through the requirements for each state. So it makes it pretty simple. Having said that, some states are tough. I probably should have added Massachusetts to that for a couple reasons. They are on an NIPR now, but they tend to have a paper process still. And also, Mass is very expensive non-resident. I think it's $250 for a non-resident license in Mass. So they're one of the more expensive states, and they're not quite as seamless as the other states. And then California and Florida require fingerprints. So overall, a very easy process, easy to get set up in other states. To answer your question, is it worth one client? Well, it just depends on how many cases you're going to write. If it's a state that charges a $40 non-resident appointment fee, you're going to write an Advantage plan, it makes sense. If you got one case, you want to write a PDP in Massachusetts for somebody, you might want to take a pass on that one, unless you're going to write more people because you're going to pay $250 to get appointed there, plus the process is a little tedious. And, you're going to get what's the CMS allowable on a drug plan? $78 now. So in that case, probably not worth it. We're talking about fees when you look at California and Florida. Keep in mind, an NIPR will walk you through this, but you've got the fee and you've got to pay for the fingerprint kit as well. So there's an additional expense there to keep in mind. So overall, I would say this process is a lot less difficult than we would probably assume. I've worked with a lot of insurance departments, and NIPR actually has made this a lot simpler, certainly, than it used to be. It definitely can get expensive if you're going to add multiple states. Expensive because You've got the licensing fee, and then the licensing renewal fee every year or every 2 years, and then the companies that charge non-resident appointment fees, you got to pay that too. So what I would say is, initially I get this a lot, especially people new to the business. They'll say, hey, I want to get started, and are there enough prospects in my resident state? The answer is yes, there are plenty. Now, certainly if you want to add additional states, go ahead. But if you're new to the business, I would start with your resident state and then add new ones as needed. I would not start off with multiple states unless you have a specific reason for doing so. Human nature, I think, is, well, one state's good, 10 is better, but 10 is more expensive too. So add the states as needed. I would not just jump into them without, a reason to do so. That's it. I kept that pretty short today, right around my 15 minutes. Let's see if we have some questions. Okay, I heard that Florida does it by county. Is that true? Yes, I left that out. Trying to think of a good reason why I left it out other than just saying I'm lazy. I can't think of one, so you kind of got me there, George. But yeah, I left that out. But yeah, Florida does have a fee that they charge by county. So for every additional county you add, there's an additional amount of money added for adding those additional counties. So yeah, that's a good question. You got me on that one. I was trying to leave that out of there. But yes, that is true. And when you go on NIPR, it will lay that out for you and show you how much it costs by county to add additional counties. So far, that's the only question we have. I'm going to just kind of ramble about a couple things to see if we get any more questions that come in. As I mentioned before, we do record all these webinars. So if you want to watch a webinar in the future and you can't make it, no problem. Just register and you'll get the recording from us. Another question, fingerprints for each county? No, just for the state. So, for example, Florida and California, they want fingerprints. They just one set of fingerprints, so you don't have to send fingerprints in for each county. It looks like that's all we have for questions. So anyway, if something comes up, if you have questions about this, call our office. I was just about to say call and ask me. In general, I know the answers to some of this stuff, but Lisa or Teal certainly know this a lot better than I do in the office. But regardless, call the office, 203-796-5403, or email us, and we'd be happy to help you out with that, with getting a non-resident appointment and answering any questions for you. And just remember, once you get that non-resident appointment, you got to send your license to us and let us know what carriers you want to add. I think that's it. I appreciate everybody coming on today. And if you have any questions, give us a call. Thanks a lot. And we're going to do the AIG webinar for their new annuity, which is exciting because it's approved in New York, which is really rare. We're going to do that tomorrow. And hope everybody has a great day. Thanks.